Fill your thirst beside the river. Wash the journey from your hands. Feel the comfort flow inside you. Come this far, you want.
Hello folks, welcome to Healing Outside the Box. Tonight's show is called The Beyond, Where Will We Be? A 57-minute video from Hans Wilhelm's Life Explained series. There have always been people who appreciate and share the great cosmic teachings that are given to us from the spiritual world via many different sources. They do not try to convince anybody, but merely offer the material to those who are ready for it. One of these generous souls is Edi Maurer, who has created many impressive documentaries over the years. Tonight we share one of these latest videos that explains what we might expect when we make our transition into the spiritual world. Our contact information will be given at the end of the show. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy the show.
Beyond. Where will we be? If someone gets out of a car, do they then become someone else? No. Why, one will ask. The person is the same, only without a car. It is the same when we die and exit the human being. We remain the same because it is we, the souls, that direct or directed the human beings. We looked through their eyes. We moved their arms and legs. We thought with their brain. At death, we step out of our human being. Then we no longer need the body to hear, to move, but we feel the same as before. We move with our soul body. We sense, hear, feel, smell just as before. Perhaps we think we can't do that without a body. Surely everyone has had an intense dream. In the dream we ate, we ran, panicked, or were even scared to death. And all that without a body? It works. At that moment, the dream was absolutely real. If someone had said to us in the dream that all of it was not real, we would not have believed them, and perhaps would have classified their arguments as a conspiracy theory and laughed at them. After all, we felt no difference from the usual life in a human being in the fully material world. Everything was consistent and seemed to be all right. Thus, we can perfectly project a world so that we do not even notice the difference from our apparently real world. Even if the dream was not real, but mostly merely a projection of our subconscious, we still experienced that we had the feeling of living in a real world. In the world beyond, however, life without a body is not an illusion, even though certain souls may live in their projection for a while. Sleep is often called the little brother of death. The soul also separates from the body in sleep. The sole difference is that the so-called silver cord, which connects body and soul, is not severed during sleep, so that the soul can slip back into the body at any time. However, the process is the same. Viewed this way, leaving the body is a daily event for the soul, and it has experienced this many thousands of times, even when we don't remember it. The content of this documentary is based on research from various sources, not least from old traditions that have been passed down, as well as current writings from current prophetic writings and so-called apocrypha, some of which were first discovered in our time. We often say, well, no one has come back, so we don't know what happens after death, and whether or not there is at all a life that continues after death. That is not quite correct, because again and again there were and are people who expanded their consciousness to such an extent that they had, or have, the ability to cross the boundaries of time and space. Thus, clairvoyant people, mystics or prophets, could not seldom pass this barrier to the so-called beyond and take a look into these worlds that are normally hidden from us. But what exactly happens when we exit the human being? How does dying actually work? A folk saying says, "As the tree falls, so does it lie." This wisdom also applies to dying and the beyond. The transition into the other world takes place individually for each person. For example, people who did not believe in a continuation of life after death die. They believed only in their body, with which they have savored so much on earth. But now the body of this person is cremated. Such a soul that is bound to the earth and which is still so closely connected with its body will be shocked by this event, because even if the body can no longer feel anything, in this case, the soul is still so closely connected with the body and its cells that the soul may even suffer the pain of burning. Then the body is only ashes in an urn. The soul may cling to the urn because vibration-wise it feels that its beloved human body is in the urn. It can remain caught in a time loop for a very long time, until it realizes its true state and awakens in the new reality, because in its world, time no longer exists. Another example. The body of a person who, all their life long, thought only of their advantage, is buried in a casket. The soul watches its funeral and remains sitting on its grave. The person may have heard from priests or pastors about a resurrection of the flesh on the day of judgment, and because the soul carries this image in it, it definitely does not want to miss this event. It does not notice that its day of judgment, that is, its last day, had already come when the body died. It does not see the spirit beings that want to help it. It does not hear its guardian spirit that wants to lead it on. It does not believe in anything, and does not want to accept any enlightenment and help. It believes only what the clergy taught the person. And with such a soul, it can take a long time until it realizes that the truth is another one, and lets itself be helped. Still others seek out their earthly family, and continue to move about in their familiar surroundings. How many such ignorant and wandering souls might there be? There could be millions, which not infrequently attach themselves like grapes to human beings in order to influence them, so that they can live out their addictions and compulsions, which were also their drives when they were alive. This is the only way they can still indulge in their own addiction a little, by drawing energy from these people. But this is dangerous for the victim. Because of the loss of energy, it becomes visibly more difficult for such people to free themselves from their addiction, because they are no longer alone with it. Whether it is smoking, alcohol, sensuality, drug addiction, or many other things, the victim is increasingly at the mercy of these addicted souls. This also applies to quarrelsomeness and other negative behavior patterns among people. There are also many restless otherworldly beings that have a sadistic satisfaction in inciting people to riots, tumults, and wars. But these dark souls can influence only like-minded people who think and feel similarly to them. However, there are many incarnated, unstable, and violent souls that are susceptible to these promptings and do not want to allow peace to develop on this planet. It often appears that politics and the press are also going in the same direction and always react in such a way that people are emotionally inflamed against other countries instead of relaxing the situation. These earthbound souls, which cling to people in order to suck energy from them, cannot further burden themselves through this behavior because they live in a somnambulistic state. However, human beings can indeed, because they have the freedom to decide what they want and do. As mentioned at the beginning, there are people who are clairvoyant and can see the deceased and people's auras and much more. One such person, who wishes to remain anonymous, said that he can see aggression increasing among young people. He can also see the entities that attach themselves to young people and lead them to violent and imbecile actions. These young people have themselves invited the demons because they take drugs or watch horror movies and play violent computer games. This opens the door to the dark world, especially in the city. He could observe how the auras of the people visibly darkened, but had changed less in the countryside. Nevertheless, he has the feeling that the light is getting stronger, and the darkness feels cornered and has its back to the wall. The dark forces are therefore under pressure to act increasingly aggressively. They may very well feel that their time and their power is coming to an end, because the vibration of the earth is slowly changing. But now on to the topic, the beyond. Where will we be? It can be that a deceased person lingers for a long time in our world, fixated on his old habits and his former family. Nobody can see him, but he perceives many things and can hear everything. At first, he does not understand why no one pays attention to him anymore. Sooner or later, perhaps, he does realize that he is no longer in a human garment. Perhaps he slowly becomes aware of his situation, that he now lives as a soul in another world, and that it no longer makes sense to continue to stay in his old world, where he can no longer have any effect. Only just now does he see and hear the spiritual beings that want to help and guide him. So he then goes to the astral world of those like him, because like attracts like. There he lives, for example, among egocentric souls that are always concerned about their own well-being. Perhaps he is also prepared there for a new incarnation, because souls bound to the earth, which are full of desires and longings for earthly success and pleasures, are inevitably attracted back to earth as if by a magnet. But to be able to incarnate, many prerequisites must be fulfilled. Everything is connected with everything, and so many cosmic aspects must coincide with each other for a possible incarnation. The future parents must have natures that largely correspond genetically with the incarnating soul, and fulfill other prerequisites in order to be able to attract this particular soul. We humans cannot imagine these comprehensive causal connections. It would greatly overtax our understanding. So it can be a big problem for a soul if suddenly the incarnation long prepared by spirit beings does not come to fruition. For example, because the targeted incarnation possibility is no longer available due to human intervention. It can take a very long time until a new window of time opens up that is largely right for the soul in all aspects. Regarding reincarnation, it must be said that it is not the will of God that souls continually reincarnate into human hosts. The goal would be to cast off the ballast, to recognize and discard mistakes, and to resolve debts instead of accumulating new ones. We should free ourselves from the attraction to the earth as soon as possible, in order to return to our spiritual homeland. For this to be possible, Christ has given each soul his power of redemption. But what should reincarnation be good for? In the fully material world, people meet as if by chance, although it is anything but chance, in order to relieve tensions with each other and to make amends for harm done. Souls are also brought together in the world of the beyond to put things in order. But in the world of the beyond, this process is very lengthy. Although the soul can attain forgiveness through repentance in the soul realms as well, it does not have the same possibilities as on earth, where, by living according to the laws of God, it can make amends for its accumulated guilt in a single incarnation. This is the reason why, despite great risks, a new reincarnation is often consciously considered. But what is it like for a soul that has already spiritually prepared itself during its lifetime on earth and thus consciously discards the human body at the time intended for it? It has made use of its life by recognizing and repenting for its mistakes, and has practiced making amends, if this was still possible. It is no longer afraid of the transition, and a joyful feeling of liberation accompanies this soul. It believes in God and the Christ power within it that will guide it as a soul. An incarnated soul has its seat near the pituitary gland, and it begins to slowly withdraw from there even before the body is discarded. It sees itself surrounded by light and perhaps already hears melodies from the sphere that corresponds to its vibration and by which it is attracted. As mentioned, each soul individually experiences this transition and arrival on the other side. For example, one soul goes through a tunnel into the light, another goes through a meadow of flowers. Sometimes the soul is warmly welcomed by its relatives and friends who have already crossed over. The soul changes sides. The former beyond becomes its new side of life. In general, we can say that a dark soul will be fetched by dark beings, and a brighter soul will be fetched by more light-filled beings. The world they will find is the same way. Dark souls with a dark aura will inhabit dark landscapes, and more luminous souls will inhabit glorious, light-filled worlds that correspond to their nature. Thus, the worlds of the beyond consist of barren, gloomy areas where suffering and hardship prevail, and also wonderful landscapes full of harmonious colors and forms. A term that is often mentioned in connection with death is the so-called life film. It is often observed in dying people that they have facial movements, as in a nightmare. They suddenly open their eyes wide, breathe heavily, and try to gesticulate. People who have had near-death experiences report that they relived important episodes in their lives in real terms, and in such real terms that it is as if they were once again standing in the midst of these events. Science calls this phenomenon the life film. When the soul begins to detach from the body, the subconscious and thus also some burdens, that is, wrongdoings against the law of life of the soul, become active. It has the opportunity to again relive its actions and, since the body is no longer able to act, to repent at least in thought. Thus, in some circumstances, many a guilt or debt can still be resolved. The relatives and friends of the deceased who continue to live on earth should consider that too intense mourning binds the soul to the earth, and it cannot develop further. Mourning for months or years does not help the soul. On the contrary, it is literally slowed down by the intense thoughts of pain and grief. We should accompany the soul positively and wish it the best on its way to the light and let it go. In this context, a symbol of this could be the old customs of the people of New Orleans. The mourners on their way to the cemetery were usually joined by a brass band, which at first played heavy and sad music, for example, a slow lament. However, on the way back, the band played rousing music, and many of the people danced to it. They were happy for the soul that in their view now has a better life. But is that so? As we have heard, our life after death will be shaped by our life in this world. In this sense, it is not automatically a better life, but life will be the same as on this side of life. That is why it is said, "As the tree falls, so does it lie," or "How you make your bed is how you lie in it." If we want to live in a peaceful world after death, it is therefore necessary that we strive to live peaceably already in this world, toward our fellow human beings, toward the animals, indeed, toward all of nature. Why should it be any different? Why should a human soul that has spent its life mentally disparaging, condemning, and abusing for its own purposes, as well as mistreating others, suddenly enter so-called heaven like an angel? How should a human soul that envied and was perpetually at odds with others suddenly live in peace? Why should the soul of a human being who felt no mercy toward animals, who took away their freedom and fattened them up in dark barns for his own profit, and had them killed directly or indirectly, now suddenly be in heaven with God, the Creator? During their lifetime, these people justified their behavior to themselves. "Everyone lives like this, it's normal," or, "Besides, I have to earn a living for myself and my family." In this way, they may have tried to soothe their conscience, but now the truth is evident, because in the beyond, nothing can be repressed. On this side of life, we can often avoid uncomfortable truths. We can close our eyes to criticism and truths that are not pleasant to us. This is no longer possible in the hereafter. In the beyond, everything is revealed. The harvest of our life comes toward us. We live in the world that we ourselves have created. The seeds we have sown are now opening, and there are no pills, no painkillers, and no tranquilizers against them. There is no escape from this world, which we ourselves built up through our thoughts and deeds. How a well-known professor, who was proud of his merciless experiments with animals, might have fared in the afterlife, is told by Manfred Keiber in the moving story Posthumous Fame. Let's listen to a short summary of this thought-provoking tale. The funeral ceremony at the casket of the famous anatomist and leader of the Physiological Institute of the Old University turned into a moving tribute by the academic community to the merits of the great deceased. On both sides of the bier stood the officers of the fraternities, and next to the family members sat the Senate of the University in full academic dress, all the faculty members and the representatives of the administration. The priest was just finishing his speech, which had deeply touched everyone's heart. He was an exemplary person, and an exemplary scholar, he concluded. We stand at the coffin of a very great person with sadness in our souls, because he has been taken from us. But by no means should we mourn and lament, for this great deceased one is not dead. He lives on, and stands before God's throne in the full splendor of his whole work-filled life. As it says in the Scriptures, "They rest from their work, and their works shall follow them." The deceased had been standing there the whole time. It seemed to him that not much had actually changed. He only remembered having seen a very luminous light, and then everything was as before, and he hardly knew that he had died. Still, it was comforting to hear how he was celebrated, and that they had spoken of God's throne with so much confidence. He was filled with a great expectation, but in this expectation there was an element of fear, something unfathomable, a great fearful question that filled his whole being. Moreover, it had become so dark that he couldn't see anything any longer. Then it became light, and an angel stood before him. How beautiful it all was! But the angel looked grave and very sad. "Where are you going?" it asked. "To paradise." "Come," said the angel. Great dark gates opened without a sound, and they entered a room that was glaringly illuminated. The walls were blood red, and countless mutilated animals were squatting on the floor whimpering. They reached out to the dead man with their cut limbs and looked at him with their blinded, lightless eyes. Their rows stretched further and further, immeasurably. "This is horrible," said the dead man. "It is indeed," said the angel. "Do all these animals go on living?" asked the dead man. "All these animals live with God," said the angel. "You cannot go there, because they stand in the way and accuse you and will not let you through. What you see are their former mirror images. They are your works, and they stay with you. You will experience all their torments within yourself until you are reborn on earth in order to expiate. It is a long and sad road, but they will not be your only companions. There is one more. Look who is standing before you in the midst of all your works." The dead man looked up and saw a horrible spectre, with a hideous human-like face, in a cloak covered with dirt and blood, and with a knife in his hand. "This is the most horrible thing I ever saw," said the dead man, and he was seized by a terror that he had never experienced before. "Who is this horrid creature? Must I always look at it?" "This is you," said the angel. "But what about science?" the dead man asked, full of fear. "Did I not serve science? Do I not belong to the great minds, even though I committed these deeds?" "The great minds were brothers to the animals, and not their executioners," said the angel. "They would turn their backs on you if you ever dared go up to them, but you will not even get near them." The dead man stayed in his paradise and had it before his eyes hour after hour, day after day, year after year. It cannot be measured in terms of time. As sobering or frightening as this story may seem to us, it is indeed just as logical and consistent as Manfred Keiber describes it. We cannot live in the world beyond in a different energetic vibration than the one we developed during our life on Earth. So we can ask ourselves, what is our energetic vibration, our aura? Is it harmonious and filled with light? Is it peaceful and loving? Or is it rather dark, shadowy, or even streaked with glaring lightning? Who are we really? That's what counts on the other side. It's not what we have pretended, perhaps also to ourselves. We are what we feel, think, speak, and what we do. And as stated, we will live in the beyond in this matrix that we ourselves have created. However, in some free churches and Christian movements, it is taught otherwise. If you believe in Christ, you are automatically saved. Then nothing more can happen to you, and you go to heaven. That is the grace of God. That is His mercy. If you believe in Christ the Redeemer, you are saved. He, Christ, as our Redeemer, has taken all our sins upon Himself. And anyone who says that one should practice self-recognition and purify oneself is quickly labeled as a self-redeemer who rejects redemption through Christ. In addition, they say that this is esoteric and an Eastern belief, and has nothing to do with the true Christianity that the Bible teaches. But is that the truth? The truth is that what counts is solely what each person puts into practice in their own life. A lot of spiritual knowledge about the divine laws alone, read in the Bible or other sources, if not lived in daily life, is merely a seed, but still far from being a fruit. In the end, however, what counts are the fruits of our lives. The souls of people who have merely accumulated spiritual knowledge will probably remain bound to the earth, and they will not have access to light-filled higher levels, despite their extensive spiritual knowledge. When we purport to be a follower of Christ, don't we have to keep His teachings and live them? When we internalize the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth, it is the path of self-recognition. His Sermon on the Mount is the inner path to the love and wisdom of God, the path to a true humanity. The ego has to be recognized and has to overcome if we really want to follow Jesus of Nazareth. If we cling to our wrong behavior, then in the beyond, we will end up in a setting of astral projection that precisely reflects our inner being, and that we may find not like. This is because we often see ourselves as better than we are, since we often wear a mask toward our neighbor and often toward ourselves. We tend to suppress our negative aspects and want to seem better than we are. This, as already mentioned, no longer works beyond death and can have very disagreeable consequences. Jesus gave us the exact instruction manual for a peaceful life, especially in his Sermon on the Mount. But this does not seem convenient for the institutional churches. The Evangelical Lutheran Free Church writes on its website that the interpretation of the Sermon on the Mount has always been a problem in the history of the Christian Church. Above all, it is the exceedingly pointed demands of Jesus of Nazareth in the Sermon on the Mount that cause difficulties. The main question is whether and to what extent such demands can be actualized in today's world at all. Roman Catholic theology tried to solve the difficulties in such a way that the Ten Commandments would be obligatory for all Christians, but that the advice of the Sermon on the Mount would be directed to only a limited circle of Christians, for example, to monks. Therefore, theologians consider the Sermon on the Mount to be a utopia and contradict Jesus of Nazareth here, who exemplified the peace and the love for God and neighbor. But instead of living the commandment of neighborly love, for centuries the churches have blessed weapons and led the world into the abyss of war and enmity. Did they not promote the subjugation of all God's creation for purposes of the human ego, garnished, among other things, with their belief that the Sermon on the Mount cannot be lived, that it is merely a vision, a utopia of a still distant time? That is why a kingdom of peace could never be established on this earth. All early Christian communities that over the centuries tried this again and again were systematically and brutally, according to the Catholic vocabulary, eradicated. Consequently, when one looks into the history of humankind, something like a realm of demons has come into being. Armament, the production and export of weapons, as well as participation in wars, are passed off today already as Christian virtues. Those who do not want to participate are, in politics, rather like outsiders who are not to be taken seriously and are not accepted. The demands may be high, but Jesus the Christ wants to lead us back to the eternal homeland, to the seven-dimensional spiritual homeland, back to our spiritual families, back to our wonderful spiritual dwelling planets. There in the spiritual world, there are no half measures. There one cannot ingratiate oneself with sweet words by using relationships or cheating one's way through with any kind of tricks. Only those get in who belong there, because they are pure. Regardless of whether one held a high secular or ecclesiastical office, regardless of which denomination one belonged to, or whether one is baptized or not. As high as the requirements of the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth may seem at first glance, there is no other way to get back to the eternal homeland, our true home. No one has to follow this path, and we can, in any case, as long as it is still possible, to repeatedly return to this planet. That is the freedom of each one. However, we should know one thing, and everyone can experience it. If we take only one step in the spirit of the Sermon on the Mount, on the inner path toward Christ, by endeavoring to walk this path honestly, then He comes many steps toward us. However, for many, the Sermon on the Mount is merely a catchword, and younger generations hardly know its content. A few excerpts from the Sermon on the Mount may show us or remind us of what Jesus of Nazareth taught back then, and what it was about for him. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. This is not about people who live in material poverty, but about people who serve the common good and do not strive for worldly goods and for only their own well-being. Accordingly, no self-centered people will enter the so-called kingdom of heaven, but only those who are concerned about the welfare of others. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. God does not send any grief. Those who grieve caused it themselves. But whoever bears their suffering without blaming others and recognizes and repents of their part will be comforted. They will experience the mercy of God. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Here again, the prerequisite is clearly defined as to who can enter the purely spiritual worlds. This is not something that a baptism can accomplish. It is not the one who knows the Bible by heart. Faith is also merely a beginning, and is far from being a pure heart. Only the one who is pure in heart, through a life in the spirit of neighborly love, will behold God. Woe unto you who are full now, for you shall hunger. For most people, mine and thine is very important, and there is a lot of dispute among people due to this. Those who satiate themselves on worldly goods are poor in light, and try to compensate this weakness with external wealth, with greed and luxury. Their aura is dark, and these souls, whether in the astral world or on the earth, are attracted to their own kind. Come to terms quickly with your adversary while you are on the way to court with him, or your adversary may hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the officer, and you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. This is one of the most important teachings. It points out that the law of cause and effect is relentless. If we do not reconcile and, for example, do not try to compensate for the harm we have done to our neighbor, as long as we are still on the way, that is, as long as we live on this earth. In the beyond, neutralizing a debt becomes very difficult. Because in the astral realms, the law of attraction applies, like to like. While here in coarse matter, we can approach every human being, no matter what level of consciousness he has, to resolve the problem. If we do not make use of this, then often the only thing that remains is expiation, that is, suffering through what we have inflicted on another, or on nature and on the animals, until the last penny, that is, until the whole debt is paid. This is a very important teaching of Jesus of Nazareth, who warns us because he does not want us to suffer. But I say to you who hear, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you. For many, probably one of the teachings they dismiss as utopia. But how can someone return to the kingdom of heaven for whom there are still enemies? Unimaginable. Let's look at world politics. Aren't the reports and statements often made in such a way as to make nations hostile to each other? Jesus of Nazareth taught that we should be like the sun, which shines on all people equally. In this way we too should spread selfless love to all. If we do not become like the pure beings of light, we cannot be accepted into their community, because like attracts like. Do not judge, so that you will not be judged. For you will be judged in the same way you judge others, and with whatever measure you measure, you will be measured again in turn. And as you do to others, so will it be done to you. A tenet that explains the law of cause and effect like probably none other. Our thoughts, words, and deeds are our own judges. This principle also applies to the beyond. There we will find a world that corresponds to our behavior. If we were loners because we disparaged all others, we may very well be alone again. Perhaps in an endless desert of self-projection. If we were cold and dismissive of our neighbor, what might the corresponding world to that be? A barren, dark, and cold world? If we were stingy, what surroundings would reflect this? Perhaps a world of only moss-covered stones. The moss as the equivalent of self-love, which then represents the only food? The more we recognize and repent our own wrong behavior, our wrong attitude, our wrong deeds, and begin to seek the light, the warmer, brighter, and more luxuriant it should become in our world beyond, according to the law of correspondence. For we ourselves are the world in which we live and will live. One of the most profound and helpful teachings in the Sermon on the Mount is surely the metaphor of the beam and the splinter. How is it that you see the splinter in your brother's eye and are not aware of the beam in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother that you want to take the splinter out of his eye, and see, a beam is in your eye? You hypocrite! First take the beam out of your own eye, only then will you see clearly, so as to be able to take the splinter out of your brother's eye. Here too, in principle, it is about the reflection, the correspondence of our inner being, this time projected onto our neighbor. What annoys us about another is in us, ourselves. Only that string can vibrate in us that is also present in us. This does not always seem to be true, or so we often think. For example, when we get annoyed by another person's external disorder, it reflects back to us only our own disorder. The disorder may be in our world of thoughts, or we may otherwise have no order in our lives. For example, chaos in our relationships, or many other things. If this were not the case, we would be able to convey the hint of disorder to another person in such an understanding way that they could accept it without any problem, and would not generate any counter-energy. This occurs mainly when we react from a correspondence, that is, when we project our own weakness onto the other person. Then the other person reacts harshly because he or she feels attacked. This is a very important teaching, and if we take it seriously, it is an invaluable help every day on our inner path to God. But it also means that we try to be aware of our feelings and thoughts at every moment, so as not to sleep through the day and thus leave unheeded the impulses that it wants to give us. No one knows when their judgment, that is, their last day, will be on this earth. That is why it makes sense to consciously deal with this fact from within. Let us take a few minutes and imagine that our transition to the other world is imminent. Are we free to go? Why do we possibly not want to think about it? Why are we perhaps horrified by this question? What would still keep us on this planet? What would we have to put in order beforehand? Let's check our thoughts. Is there something that is still bothering us? An example: one of our children has problems, and we want him to be happy. These are burdensome thoughts that weigh us down. How do we deal with this? Do we trustingly hand this situation over to God, our loving Father? He knows what lesson of the moment needs to be dealt with by this person. We, on the other hand, judge according to our human consciousness. We basically see suffering and problems negatively. So we irradiate this problem with anxious negative thoughts, which are anything but helpful, even though we want only the best. We should send positive thoughts of confidence. Let's think, for example, of the people who spend their lives in a psychiatric mental hospital or are considered mentally retarded. It hardly occurs to anyone to see a chance for their souls here. It is a soul burdened that flows out through the body. In this way, the soul can purify itself and, above all, and this is important, not burden itself any further. In this way, a debt can flow out and be expiated, so that the soul can be free. This soul is then no longer bound to the earth and, after the demise of the body, goes to more light-filled planes, where it can be further instructed. Many people may look down on these confined persons with pity or disgust and feel sorry for them. They delight in their own free life and take everything this world offers them. The consequence is often that after this life, they incarnate again on this still dark earth. Who, then, are the truly pitiable and confined ones? Thus we see many things only from our limited human consciousness. We do not see how souls and human beings have the possibility to mature internally, even through a handicap, through suffering, problems, and seemingly hopeless situations. People become humbler and softer as a result. They may suddenly begin to ask questions about the meaning of life. Formerly, they would have laughed at such questions. Often, when illness and other blows of fate occur, people go into themselves. For the first time, they turn to a higher power that may exist for them and begin to communicate with it or to pray. What torments us as an apparently bad condition is perhaps, in truth, a great help and chance for the soul and perhaps even a new beginning. It emerges from this situation a bit chastened. Each of us has other worries that burden us. Let's tackle them and try to see our life from a certain distance, as if we were in space with our consciousness and were observing ourselves as human beings on the earth. You see things better from a distance. Another example, a topic that affects many people, is partnership. People who are attached to their partners do not want to be separated from them. However, one day we will all inevitably be separated externally by death. So it would be good if we familiarize ourselves with these thoughts beforehand, and thus find an inner stability and become independent. Because everything to which we still cling binds us, and will be like magnets that pull us back into coarse matter, into the next incarnation, and prevent us from going into higher, more luminous realms. The respective partner is given to us only for a short time on earth, and we would do well to become true friends during this time, where each wishes the other only the best. An inner closeness in the heart cannot be separated. Moreover, through prophetic revelations, it is known that we have a dual in the spiritual homeland, that is, a partner who may even be our guardian spirit during this time on earth. So the very human question is often, isn't the dual then jealous when I have another partner here? Certainly not, for that is a typical human thought. A spiritual being knows no possessiveness and lives what we should strive for. The unselfish state of being brotherly or sisterly is neighborly love. It wants only the best for the other. The following example shows how far a deed of love can go. There are said to be wandering souls that have been caught in the cycle of incarnations for thousands of years and do not manage to free themselves from it. After the death of their body, they go again and again to the so-called purification spheres, and soon go to a new incarnation, and thus they go over this earth in a new human body. In order to help these stuck souls, it can happen that angel beings voluntarily incarnate and take upon themselves the burdens of such hopeless wandering souls, in order to expiate their guilt for them. But this also bears a great risk for the pure being. It can burden and bind itself even more, because all its memories of the pure worlds are covered, as with every other incarnated soul. It is born into this world and knows nothing of its selfless effort and mission, and cannot remember anything. On the other hand, the soul freed from its burden now has more light and thus the possibility to take in further knowledge about the true life. It is attracted to higher levels and can thus develop further. This earth seems to be populated predominantly by renegade beings who voluntarily left the spiritual homeland back then to create an allegedly better creation and are now stagnating in coarse matter in the cycle of rebirth. However, beings from the spiritual homeland have also incarnated in a human body. Their task is to lead back the strayed souls and to enlighten humankind. Their tasks are manifold. They, too, take a great risk with their selfless commitment. If they deviate too much from their task and let themselves become too enmeshed in earthly habits, it may be that they, too, will have to face further incarnations in order to gradually be able to free themselves from the attraction to matter. The higher the vibration of the earth, the more difficult, or even impossible, it becomes for burdened souls to incarnate. This is how the way is cleared for a new peaceful future, in which free people live who pay homage to God by living peacefully among themselves. The planet Earth can recover and become again the paradise it once was, and even more beautiful and radiant. As already mentioned, everyone experiences the world of the beyond differently, according to their state of consciousness. While some meet their self-created projections, others roam through the world of human beings as disembodied spirits. In the world of the beyond, a conscious soul meets its already deceased relatives, its spiritual friends, and is ready to be guided further by helpful, luminous beings or by its guardian spirit, always toward the light. This all depends on the extent to which the person has led a conscious life. Did he go blindly through life, or did he think about the meaning of his life? Why are we in this school of earth? We are here, for example, to forgive and to ask for forgiveness, and, for instance, to stop doing things that have led to disputes. Or maybe we are here to make up for what we have done wrong in this life or in previous incarnations. Perhaps we are also here to accept our fate, possible suffering and illnesses, and thus to also try to recognize what wrong behavior has led to this, and then to change it. Those who thus begin to analyze the meaning of their life on earth, as well as their thoughts, take the first step towards self-recognition. Only in this way can we make positive use of this school of life and one day pass over into the world beyond as a purified soul, consciously and without fear. Jesus of Nazareth gave us the tools for this in his Sermon on the Mount. But there are more innumerable aids. All those who begin to search are guided individually, as if by chance they come across enlightening books, meet people, or find a video that helps them and answers their questions, and perhaps also awakens new questions. Everyone who has come across this video has probably already experienced this guidance. The guidance to self-recognition is to be understood under grace, not that Christ takes from the soul this path of self-recognition and purification, as many would like to believe. They may perhaps one day cry out, "Save me, O Lord, I have believed in you and read the Bible daily." Then perhaps the soul will get the answer, "Did you also put into practice what Jesus taught in your Bible in the Sermon on the Mount? Have you recognized the beam in your eye and changed? Didn't Jesus teach that only through the deed does a house stand securely on the rock, able to withstand the storms? Faith is just the beginning. Then follows the deed and the work on oneself." The question arises, how can someone enter the kingdom of heaven if there are still shadows in their aura, such as longings, desires, envy, disparagement, overestimation of self, wanting to be better than others, and much more. Does a human being fit into the circle of the pure children of God in this way? Human desires, which we still longingly want to experience today, will also be the theme after death, and will continue to bind and preoccupy us, until we have recognized their futility and self-centeredness, and are ready to change our thinking and follow the advice of the heavenly messengers of light. We should also distance ourselves from religious concepts of ecclesiastical character, because they bind us instead of setting us free. Otherwise, we will find ourselves back in the same ecclesiastical atmosphere, going to Mass and eating hosts without making even one step toward the light. Many will then have to painfully realize that the hopes and promises made to them are not true. We should therefore realize that our life on this earth is merely a short-term episode in our cosmic life, and thus should not bind ourselves, body and soul, to people or material goods, so that we will one day have an easier time finding our way in the world of the beyond. We can continue to affectionately meet people we hold dear, that goes without saying. But if we become aware that not only a limited circle, but all ensouled people are our brothers and sisters, in a figurative sense also all animals and the whole of creation that is permeated by God, then in this awareness we can bit by bit loosen our binding to matter and feel more confident, less fearful, and freer. Those who respect their fellow people will never harm them. They endeavor to be peaceable, gentle, and conciliatory people in all areas of life. Thus also toward animals and nature. Such peace-loving souls, after leaving the body and going to the world of the beyond, will not be attracted to peaceless and violent beings. They will be attracted to a planet full of light, whose vibrational melody they may be able to hear, and will be guided by it. On this planet, they will live among their own kind, together with other peace-loving and gentle beings. They will be given a task or engage in an activity that will delight their heart and fulfill them. Who does not want to live one day on such a planet and in such a peaceful community? We shape tomorrow in the now. How this will look is our free decision. Therefore, let us live in such a way that we will not taste death, but see it as a transition and no longer fear it.
Fill your thirst beside the river. Wash the journey from your hands. Feel the comfort flow inside you. Come this far, you understand.